I posted about my birth date mix-up on my Finsta as a joke. 2 hours later, I was in the back seat watching my dream college acceptance letter burn in a gas station trash can. It started at the DMV when I was getting my learner's permit because I just turned 16. The clerk checking my birth certificate suddenly stopped while looking at the screen, then turned to me. "Your birthday is March 15th, correct?" "No," I said. "October 23rd. That's when I celebrate." She turned the monitor toward me, showing me my digital birth certificate that said March 15th. I stared at it, confused. Why had my parents been hiding my real birthday for 16 years? At first, I thought it was funny. I took a photo of the screen and left. On my way home, I posted it to my Finsta. DMV just exposed my parents for celebrating my birthday on the wrong day for 16 years. I didn't think anything of it, but I went home to ask them about it. When I walked in, my dad was drinking coffee. My mom was on her laptop. Normal Thursday afternoon. "So," I said, "apparently my birthday is March 15th, not October." My dad's coffee mug slipped right out of his hand. My mom's eyes widened to inconceivable levels. "What did you just say?" I explained myself. "The DMV showed me my birth certificate. Why have we been celebrating my birthday in October when it's in March?" My dad stood up so fast his chair fell over. "Did you tell anyone about this?" "No, but I put it on my Instagram." "Why?" My mom's hands started shaking. She couldn't even type properly. "How many people saw it? How long has it been up?" I checked my phone. Like 31 views. "It's been up maybe 20 minutes. What's going on?" Dad grabbed my phone right out of my hands. I never gave him my passcode, but he unlocked it immediately. That should have been my first clue. He pulled up Facebook on his laptop and turned it toward me. There was a post from some page I'd never seen before. "Have you seen our missing son? Taken from us 16 years ago. Born March 15th. Please help us find him." There was a baby photo attached. The baby had my eyes, my nose. It looked exactly like my baby pictures. The post had 12,000 shares. "Who are these people?" I asked. Then while we were all staring at the screen, something happened that made my blood go cold. A new comment appeared right in front of us. "I think I found him." There was a link to my Finsta. Before I could even look at the profile picture of the person who commented, my mom started crying. Actually crying. "We're out of time," she said. My dad was already pulling suitcases out of the closet. "Someone explain what's happening right now," I yelled. Dad sat me down. He pulled up the Facebook post again and scrolled. Same post every single March 15th for 12 years. Every year. Same baby photo. Same desperate message. "Are those my real parents?" I asked, my world crumbling. "No," my mom said. Her voice was shaking. "They're the people we saved you from." She took a breath. "They were trafficking children, stealing babies and selling them. We found out what they were doing. We couldn't go through legal channels," Dad added. "It would have taken years. You would have been moved or sold or disappeared. So we just took you. And we ran. We changed your birthday on every document we could, made you celebrate October instead of March. We thought if you never knew your real birthday, you could never accidentally reveal it." My head was spinning. "So you kidnapped me?" "We saved you," Mom said. Then she pulled out her phone, showed me a second Facebook post. Different baby photo. Same date, March 15th. Same traffickers. I looked at her, confused. "You had a twin sister," she whispered. "Same trafficking ring. We tried to take both of you that night." Her voice broke. "We only got you out." I sat there trying to process what she just said. Then something clicked. Something I'd never thought about before. "Is that why we always had 2 birthday cakes?" I asked quietly. "Even though I'm an only child?" Mom started crying harder. She couldn't even answer. Dad put his hand on my shoulder. "Every March 15th we see both posts, yours and hers. We've lived with that for 16 years. We failed her. We will not lose you too." An hour later, we were in the car. My mom's phone was blowing up with unknown numbers calling her. Both Mom and Dad were going paler with each call. Everything we owned was already packed. We started speeding out of the town and stopped at a gas station somewhere. Mom pulled my college acceptance letter, the one that came that morning. I'd gotten a full scholarship to my dream school, the thing I'd been working toward my entire life, but she just threw it in the trash can and lit it on fire with a lighter. "No records," she said. "Nothing that connects you to this name, this place, this life." I watched the paper turn black. That was my future. "You'll have a different one. For now, let's focus on staying alive." We got back in the car and started driving again. Dad took the first shift behind the wheel. Mom sat in the passenger seat staring at her phone. I was in the back surrounded by bags and suitcases we'd thrown in so fast. Everything we owned was crammed around me, but it felt like we'd left our whole lives behind at that gas station. The highway was dark and empty. Every time headlights appeared behind us, I watched Dad's hands squeeze the steering wheel harder. His knuckles turned white. He'd check the rearview mirror every few seconds. Mom wasn't looking at her phone anymore. She was crying quietly. Not loud sobbing, just tears running down her face while she stared out the window at nothing. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what. Hours passed. Dad and Mom switched places without stopping the car. Mom drove while Dad tried to sleep in the passenger seat, but he kept jerking awake and checking behind us. I couldn't sleep at all. My brain kept replaying everything. The DMV clerk's face, the Facebook post, that baby photo that looked exactly like me. The comment appearing in real time with the link to my Finsta, my college acceptance letter turning black in the flames. Around 3 a.m., we finally pulled off the highway. Mom drove us to this really rundown motel on the edge of some small town I'd never heard of. The sign was half burned out. The parking lot had cracks everywhere. Mom went inside while Dad and I waited in the car. She came back 5 minutes later with a key. She paid cash. Used a fake name. I heard her tell the clerk we were the Johnsons. We grabbed our most important bags and went to the room. It was worse than I expected. The whole place smelled like old cigarette smoke and something moldy. The carpet had stains I didn't want to think about. There were 2 beds with ugly floral covers that looked like they hadn't been washed in forever. The bathroom door didn't close right, but my parents didn't even seem to notice. They immediately started talking in low voices. Planning. I just sat on one of the beds. My whole body felt numb. Everything I'd known about my life was a lie. My birthday. My name. My parents weren't kidnappers, they were heroes. Except they kind of were kidnappers. I had a twin sister I'd never met. The people who gave birth to me were monsters. It was too much. I couldn't process any of it. Dad suddenly pulled out a box from one of the bags. I'd never seen it before. He opened it on the bed and I stared. Inside were multiple driver's licenses with different names but our photos. Passports with different names, social security cards, birth certificates, all fake. There were also thick bundles of cash held together with rubber bands. Thousands of dollars just sitting there. Dad looked at me. He said they'd had an emergency escape plan since the day they took me. They always knew this moment might come. They'd been preparing for 16 years. Every month they'd added more cash to the box, updated the fake documents as I got older, had new photos taken. They'd planned routes out of state, memorized safe house locations, all of it hidden in case we ever had to run. I felt sick. My whole childhood had been lived under this shadow I never knew existed. Mom sat down next to me. She was shaking. She said she needed to tell me everything about that night 16 years ago. The whole truth. She'd been working as a social worker back then. She'd gotten a case about a family that seemed off. Too many kids coming and going. Weird hours. Neighbors reporting strange things. She'd started investigating quietly. The more she looked, the worse it got. She'd discovered it was a trafficking ring. They were stealing babies and selling them. She'd found out where they were keeping the children, a house on the edge of town. She'd gone there one night with Dad. They'd called the police first, but nothing happened. Their report got buried, so they went themselves just to see. Just to confirm. They'd looked through a window and seen 6 babies in cribs. All of them tiny, all of them crying. 2 of the babies were identical. Twins, me and my sister. Mom said they'd tried to figure out what to do. Call the FBI, call state police. But while they were trying to decide, someone had come back to the house. They'd had maybe 30 seconds. Dad had run in and grabbed the closest baby, me. He'd tried to get both twins, but the person was coming up the walk. He'd only had time to get one of us out. They'd run to their car and driven away. Left my sister behind. Mom's voice broke when she talked about it. The guilt was destroying her even now. 16 years later, and she still couldn't forgive herself for only saving one of us. I didn't know what to say. I asked the question that had been burning in my head since we left home. Why didn't they just call the police after they got me out? Dad leaned forward. He said they did try. They'd called everyone. Local police, state police, FBI, Child Protective Services. But the trafficking ring had connections everywhere. Every report they made got shut down or delayed. Files disappeared, investigators got reassigned. It became clear that someone with power was protecting the operation. If they'd gone through legal channels, it would have taken years. By then, I would have been moved or sold or disappeared forever. So they'd made the choice to just run. Take me and start over somewhere new. Change everything about our identities. They'd changed my birthday on every document they could access or forge. Made me celebrate October instead of March. They'd thought if I never knew my real birthday, I could never accidentally connect myself to those Facebook posts. I'd never stumble onto the truth. Mom pulled out her phone. Her hands were still shaking. She opened Facebook and showed me photos she'd been secretly keeping. Pictures of my twin sister from the posts that appeared every year. There were dozens of them, different ages, baby photos, toddler photos, school pictures, recent ones from this year. I stared at a girl who had my exact face. Same eyes, same nose, same mouth, but her expression was different. Sadder somehow, like she'd lived through things I couldn't imagine. Looking at her felt like looking at a ghost, a version of myself that grew up in a completely different world. A world I'd been saved from. Mom said she'd been monitoring those posts for years. Every March 15th, she'd check to see if both posts appeared. Mine and my sister's. They always did. Same desperate message. Same plea for help finding their missing children, except it was all lies. We stayed at that motel for 2 days. My parents barely slept. They spent hours on their burner phones calling people I'd never heard of, old contacts from some underground network. I started learning things about my parents I'd never known. They weren't just random people who'd stumbled onto a trafficking ring. They'd been part of a larger group trying to take down the whole operation. Other social workers, some FBI agents, regular people who'd discovered what was happening and wanted to stop it. But everything had gone wrong. The group had been exposed. People had been threatened. Some had disappeared. My parents had grabbed me and run before they could be silenced too. On the second night, someone knocked on our motel room door. Dad looked through the peephole and then opened it fast. A woman walked in. She was maybe 40 with dark hair pulled back. She carried a large bag. Mom hugged her immediately. This was Violet Thorne, someone my parents trusted completely. Violet was a child psychologist who worked with trafficking survivors. She'd been part of that original group trying to stop the Gilmores. She'd stayed involved all these years. She put her bag on the bed and pulled out burner phones, supplies, food. She immediately started asking me questions about how I was handling everything. Was I eating? Sleeping? Did I understand what was happening? Her voice was calm and professional, but also kind, like she actually cared. Then Violet sat down and told me something that made my whole world tilt again. My biological parents weren't victims. Mordecai and Dinah Gilmore weren't grieving parents whose children had been stolen. They were the ones running the trafficking ring. They were the monsters at the center of everything. Those Facebook posts searching for their missing son weren't about love. They were about recovering stolen property, about finding the people who'd exposed their operation, about silencing anyone who knew the truth. I felt sick. Actually physically sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. The people who gave birth to me sold children. They destroyed families. They were the worst kind of evil. Violet followed me to the bathroom. She handed me a towel. She said there was more I needed to know. My twin sister wasn't just another victim they'd kept. She was likely being used as part of their operation now, either as bait to lure in other families, or being groomed to help recruit victims. The Gilmores had been using her for years in their public campaigns, making her the face of their fake charity, teaching her to manipulate people's emotions. My sister had grown up thinking she was helping find missing children, when really she was helping the people who stole them. I sat on that disgusting motel bathroom floor and cried. Not just for myself, for my sister, for the childhood she'd had, for the lies she'd been fed, for the fact that she was still trapped with those monsters while I'd gotten out. Violet sat with me. She didn't try to make it better. She just let me cry until I couldn't anymore. When I finally got up from that bathroom floor, my legs felt shaky, but I walked back into the main room where my parents were still on their phones. Dad was writing something down on a piece of paper, crossing things out, rewriting them. Mom kept refreshing her laptop screen over and over. Violet sat down with them, and they started talking in low voices about every single thing I'd done in the past year that could have exposed us. Every Instagram post, every school form with my birthday, every doctor's appointment where they had to show my birth certificate. They'd been living like this for 16 years, constantly scared that one wrong move would bring the Gilmores to our door. Mom told me about the time I wanted to join the school soccer team, and they said no because the registration form required my birth certificate. I'd been so mad at them. I thought they were being controlling. But really they were terrified that some administrator would notice the date didn't match what I'd been celebrating. Dad mentioned my 8th birthday party when I'd invited my whole class, and one kid's mom worked for the county. They'd spent that entire party sick with worry that she'd somehow connect me to the missing baby posts. Every single normal thing I wanted to do as a kid had been a potential disaster they were trying to prevent. I sat there listening to them list all these moments I barely remembered, and suddenly the 2 birthday cakes made complete sense. It wasn't just about remembering my sister, it was about keeping March 15th present in their minds, even though they made me celebrate in October. They needed that reminder of what they'd done and who they'd left behind. The October birthday was the lie we lived with. The March birthday was the truth they carried alone. Around 8 that night, someone knocked on the door again. Dad looked through the peephole and opened it fast. A man walked in carrying a laptop bag. He was maybe 40 with dark hair and tired eyes. Violet stood up and hugged him. This was Carl, her husband. He set his laptop on the bed and pulled out his FBI badge, showing it to me like he needed to prove who he was. He'd been investigating the Gilmore trafficking ring for 8 years, ever since his own daughter was almost taken by a connected operation. He knew everything about what my parents had done, and technically he should arrest them for kidnapping. But he wasn't going to do that. He was going to help us instead by giving information he couldn't officially share. Carl opened his laptop and showed us a file on someone named Oswald Donovan. Private investigator, former police detective, very good at finding people who don't want to be found. The Gilmores hired him 2 days ago, right after my Finsta post went up. Carl explained that Oswald probably has software that monitors social media for specific keywords in certain areas. March 15th birthday post within 100 miles of where the Gilmores think we might be. That's how someone connected my post to their Facebook page so fast. It wasn't luck. It was technology and money and a very determined investigator. Carl pulled up a map on his laptop and started marking routes we should take. We couldn't stay at the motel any longer. 2 days was already pushing it. He gave us addresses for safe houses along the way, places run by people who help trafficking victims and don't ask questions. The first one was a farm in rural Pennsylvania, about 6 hours north. After that, there were more locations scattered across different states, each one a place we could hide for a few days before moving again. Carl made my dad memorize the addresses instead of writing them down. No paper trail, no digital records, just information carried in our heads that could disappear if we needed it to. We left the motel at midnight. Everything we owned was already packed from when we first ran, so it only took 10 minutes to load the car. Mom paid cash for the room, and we drove out of that parking lot like we were being chased, even though no one was behind us yet. The drive to Pennsylvania took forever. Dad and Mom switched every 2 hours, so someone was always alert. I tried to sleep in the back seat, but kept waking up every time we slowed down or changed lanes. We arrived at the farm just as the sun was coming up. An older couple met us at the door. They didn't introduce themselves, and we didn't offer our names. They just led us down to a basement room with 3 beds and a small bathroom. The woman brought us food 3 times a day, leaving it at the top of the stairs and knocking twice. For the first time since leaving home, I actually slept for more than a few hours. Something about being underground in that quiet basement made me feel hidden enough to rest. On the second day at the farm, I finally let myself think about everything I'd lost. My friends who probably thought I just disappeared. My school where I'd spent 3 years building my GPA for college applications. That full scholarship I'd worked so hard for, now just ashes in a gas station trash can. Even my name felt wrong now, like it belonged to someone else, some version of me that didn't exist anymore. I started crying again, and Mom held me on that basement bed. She cried too, saying she was sorry over and over. Sorry for not finding a better way. Sorry for lying all those years. Sorry for the life I lost because of choices they made before I could even talk. But she wasn't sorry for taking me. She'd do that part again in a second. Dad sat down next to us that afternoon and started telling me stories I'd never heard before. How I was a quiet baby who rarely cried, even during that terrifying first night when they drove 12 hours straight to get far away. How I'd learned to walk at 10 months, pulling myself up on furniture in whatever temporary apartment they were hiding in at the time. How they'd fallen completely in love with me within days, even though they'd originally planned to find me a safe adoptive family. He wanted me to understand that even though what they did was illegal, even though they'd kidnapped me by any legal definition, I'd always been their real son. Not because of biology or paperwork, but because they'd chosen me every single day for 16 years. The burner phone rang on the 3rd morning. It was Carl. Oswald had tracked our initial route and was currently at the motel where we'd stayed. He was showing people our photos and offering money for information. The clerk remembered us, described our car, mentioned we'd asked about routes heading north. Carl said we needed to move immediately because Oswald would follow that lead, and Pennsylvania wasn't a big state. We packed in 15 minutes. The older couple gave us food for the road, and we left through a back entrance that led to a dirt road instead of the main driveway. We drove all day and into the night, this time heading south instead of continuing east. Dad's hands were tight on the steering wheel. Mom kept checking her phone like she expected it to ring with more bad news. I sat in the back watching them and realized they'd been living like this my entire life. This fear I was feeling for the first time, they'd been carrying it every single day for 16 years, just hidden under normal suburban routines. Every time they smiled at my birthday parties or drove me to the school or helped with homework, this terror was underneath it all. They'd been running even when we were standing still, always ready to grab me and disappear if the Gilmores got too close. I thought I knew my parents, but I'd only known the performance they'd been giving, the calm surface they'd maintained while drowning in constant fear underneath. We stopped at a rest stop in Virginia around midnight. My parents needed coffee and I needed to use the bathroom. While they were inside the building, I sat in the car and pulled out one of the burner phones. I told myself I was just checking one last time before deleting everything. I opened the app and my Finsta loaded slowly on the cheap phone's browser. The post about my birthday had 847 views now, way more than the 31 it had when we left home. I scrolled through the comments and my hands started shaking. Most of them were normal stuff from people I actually knew, confused about why I posted something so random. But mixed in were accounts I'd never seen before. Brand new profiles with no posts and no followers. They were all trying to engage with me, asking where I lived, what school I went to, if I wanted to talk about my birthday confusion. One account kept commenting over and over, asking if I was okay and saying they could help me figure out what was going on with my parents. It was obviously Oswald or someone working for him. I kept scrolling and found one comment that made me feel sick. The account name was just a string of numbers. The profile picture was a woman I didn't recognize. The comment said exactly what Violet had warned us about. "We've missed you so much. Please come home. Your sister needs you." I stared at those words. My biological mother. Or someone pretending to be her. The trick was so obvious, but it still messed with my head. My sister needs you. Like I was supposed to just forget everything my parents told me and go running back to the people who sold babies. I deleted the app right there. Watched the icon disappear from the screen. My parents came back to the car and we kept driving. We crossed into North Carolina just as the sun was coming up. The roads got smaller and the towns got quieter. Around noon, we pulled into a place so small I don't think it even had a real name. Just a main street with a few stores and a gas station. The safe house was an apartment above a store that sold fishing supplies. A woman met us at the side entrance and led us up a narrow staircase. She was maybe 50 with gray hair and she barely looked at us. Just handed my dad a key and pointed to different rooms. She brought us food that afternoon and set up a laptop on the kitchen table. She told us the internet was secure and couldn't be tracked. Then she left and we didn't see her again for 2 days. Mom opened the laptop that evening and called me over. She'd been quiet all day, but now she had this look on her face like she needed to show me something important. She pulled up files that Carl had sent her on an encrypted email, news articles first. Headlines about missing children going back 20 years, different states, different ages, but all connected to the same operation, the Gilmore trafficking ring. She clicked through FBI reports that Carl had secretly given her. Pages of information about how they worked, how they found vulnerable families, how they moved children across state lines, how they covered their tracks. Then she showed me testimonies from people who got away, other victims who escaped and told their stories. I read through them while Mom sat next to me. One woman talked about being taken when she was 3. Another man described watching his little brother get sold when they were both in the system. The trafficking ring had been operating for over 20 years. Hundreds of families destroyed. Hundreds of kids who disappeared or got moved around or never made it out. I felt sick reading it all. Mom kept clicking through pages and I kept reading. Then I found an article about a raid that happened 8 years ago. Federal agents recovered several children from a house connected to the Gilmores. The article had photos of agents leading kids out. I looked at the date and did the math. 8 years ago was when Carl started investigating. I asked Mom about it and she explained that Carl's own daughter was almost taken by a connected operation. Not the Gilmores directly, but people who worked with them. Carl got her back, but it changed him. Made him focus his entire career on bringing down trafficking rings. That's why he was helping us even though it could cost him his job. That's why he'd been building a case for 8 years. It was personal for him too. I stayed up late that night reading everything on the laptop, learning about the people my biological parents really were. What they'd done to other families, other kids like me and my sister. When I finally closed the laptop, it was past 2 in the morning. I couldn't sleep, so I got up and walked through the apartment. Found my dad sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. He had an old photo in his hands. I could see it even in the dim light from the window. 2 babies, me and my sister. We looked exactly the same. Same tiny faces, same dark hair, wearing matching white onesies. I sat down across from him and he didn't say anything for a minute. Then he told me that not one single day had passed where he didn't think about that night. About the choice they made. About grabbing me and running while my sister stayed behind. He said he still woke up sometimes wondering if they did the right thing. If saving one child while leaving another was better than saving neither. If my sister hated them for taking her twin away. I told him I understood. That I didn't blame them for making an impossible choice in a terrible situation. But I also told him I was mad. That I'd been angry since we left home and I was tired of pretending I wasn't. They lied to me for 16 years. Never trusted me enough to tell me the truth. Never gave me a chance to understand or help or even just know who I really was. Dad's face changed and he started explaining, started defending. His voice got louder. Mom heard us and came into the kitchen. Then we were all yelling. Me shouting about every normal thing I missed because they were too scared. Every sleepover I couldn't go to. Every social media account they monitored. Every friend they ran background checks on without telling me. Every birthday party where I felt like something was wrong but couldn't figure out what. They yelled back about how every single restriction was about keeping me alive. How they couldn't tell me because I might slip up. How they had to watch everything because one mistake meant losing me forever. How they gave up their own lives and families and careers to keep me safe. We all ended up crying. Dad apologized for lying. Mom apologized for not finding a better way. I apologized for not understanding sooner how scared they'd been. But the hurt was still there between us. The anger and fear and guilt all mixed together. We hugged and said we loved each other, but something had broken that couldn't be fixed with just apologies. The next morning, someone knocked on the door. Mom looked through the peephole and opened it fast. Violet came in carrying a bag of groceries and looking worried. She set the bag down and told us she had news. A social worker named Isla Carlson had been asking questions about our case. Isla worked in the county where I was taken from 16 years ago. She'd been going through old records for another case and found things that didn't match up. Documents that had been changed, dates that were wrong, notes that suggested something big got covered up around the time I disappeared. Isla had been digging deeper and now she knew something happened. She just didn't know exactly what yet. We all got scared immediately. If Isla reported us to the authorities, my parents would get arrested. I'd get taken away. Everything we'd been running from would catch up. But Violet said she wasn't sure what Isla planned to do. Isla had a reputation for caring more about kids being safe than following every rule. She'd bent regulations before when it meant protecting a child. But she was also a mandatory reporter. The law said she had to report suspected child abuse or kidnapping. If she didn't and someone found out, she could lose her job and face criminal charges herself. So we didn't know if Isla was a threat or possibly someone who might help us. Violet said she was trying to set up a meeting, so we could talk to Isla directly. Figure out what she knew and what she planned to do with that information. Until then, we just had to wait and hope that Isla cared more about the truth than about following procedure. 2 days later, Carl called with a location. He gave us an address for a church about 90 miles away in a town I'd never heard of. We left the safe house before dawn and drove through empty roads while the sky turned from black to gray. My parents didn't talk much during the drive. Mom kept checking the mirrors every few minutes, and Dad gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white. The church was small and old with peeling white paint and a crooked steeple. We parked behind it where our car couldn't be seen from the road. Carl was already waiting by a side door. He nodded at us and let us inside without saying anything. The church smelled like old wood and dust. Our footsteps echoed on the worn floor as we walked past rows of empty pews. Isla was sitting in the front row with her back to us. When she turned around, I was surprised by how young she looked. Maybe early 30s with tired eyes and brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She stood up and shook my parents' hands, then looked at me for a long moment before offering her hand to me too. Her grip was firm and her palm was cold. Carl gestured for us to sit down, and we all settled into the front pews facing each other. Isla pulled out a notebook and a pen from her bag. She clicked the pen open and closed a few times before speaking. She told us she'd been investigating the Gilmores for 2 years now. Another child in their care had shown up at a hospital with injuries that didn't match the story the Gilmores told. Isla had tried to build a case, but every time she got close to something solid, the evidence would disappear, or witnesses would suddenly refuse to talk. She kept hitting walls because the Gilmores had connections everywhere. Money bought them lawyers and favors and people who looked the other way. The system kept failing the kids she was trying to protect, and she was tired of watching it happen. Her voice got harder when she talked about the children. She wasn't asking us to trust her, she was telling us she understood why we ran. Mom started talking then, and once she started, she couldn't stop. She told Isla everything about that night 16 years ago. Details I'd never heard before. How they'd been watching the house for 3 weeks. How they'd mapped out everyone's schedule and knew exactly when the traffickers would be gone. How they'd picked the lock on a basement window and crawled inside. Mom described finding us in a back bedroom with 5 other babies. All of us in cribs lined up against the wall like we were inventory in a warehouse. She talked about how she and Dad had grabbed me first because I was closest to the window. Then Dad went back for my sister, but someone came home early. They heard a car door slam and footsteps on the porch above them. Dad was halfway across the room reaching for my sister's crib when my mom grabbed his arm and pulled him back toward the window. She said if they'd stayed another 10 seconds, they both would have been caught, and all of us would have been lost. The choice wasn't between saving 1 baby or 2. It was between saving 1 or saving none. Isla wrote everything down in her notebook. She asked careful questions about dates and locations and names. She wanted to know exactly what documents my parents had seen, what evidence they'd collected before taking me. Who else knew about the trafficking ring back then? Mom answered every question while Dad sat next to her holding her hand. I watched Isla's face change as she listened. Her jaw got tighter and her eyes got harder. She filled up page after page in her notebook. The conversation went on for hours. Sunlight moved across the floor and up the walls as we sat there. My legs fell asleep and I shifted in the pew trying to get comfortable. Finally, Isla closed her notebook and put her pen down. She looked at each of us in turn, and then said something that made my chest feel lighter for the first time in days. She said officially she never met us and had no idea where we were, but unofficially she was going to use everything my mom told her to build a case that might actually stick. She'd been trying to go after the Gilmores alone, but if she could coordinate with Carl's FBI investigation, they might finally have enough to take them down. Before Isla left, she pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. She said she took it at a public event last month. The photo showed a girl standing on a stage with the Gilmores on either side of her. The girl had my eyes, my nose, my face, but her expression was different, guarded, sad, like she was performing something she didn't feel. Looking at her made my chest hurt in a way I couldn't explain. Isla told me the girl's name was Alora. She said the Gilmores had been using her as the public face of their missing child campaign for years. They made her do interviews and speak at awareness events. She had to talk about losing her twin brother and beg people to help find him. The Gilmores used her grief to build sympathy while hiding what they really were. I asked Isla if there was any way to get Alora out. Isla's face got sadder and she shook her head. She said it was complicated because legally Alora was their daughter. There was no current evidence of abuse that would be enough to remove her from their home. The reality was that Alora might not even want to leave. She'd been with the Gilmores her whole life. They were the only parents she knew. Even if they were monsters, they were her monsters. Leaving might feel more scary to her than staying. We drove to Tennessee that night. The third safe house was a cabin in the woods outside Nashville. It had 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that smelled like pine cleaner. I took the smaller bedroom and lay on the bed staring at the ceiling. That night, I dreamed about Alora for the first time. In the dream, she was calling for help, but I couldn't reach her. I could see her, but every time I got close, she moved further away. I woke up sweating and tangled in the sheets. The dreams came back every night after that. Always the same, always her calling and me unable to help. Just like my parents couldn't reach her 16 years ago. We'd been in Tennessee for 5 days when Carl called. His voice sounded different, urgent. He said Oswald had tracked us to North Carolina and was currently searching the area around the last safe house. Someone must have seen us or our car. We had maybe a day before Oswald figured out we'd moved on. Carl said we needed to change our pattern. The safe house network wasn't safe anymore. We needed to find somewhere with no connection to the network or our old life. Dad hung up the phone and sat down at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. Mom started packing our stuff again, even though we'd barely unpacked. I asked what we were going to do, and Dad didn't answer for a long time. Finally, he said he needed to make a call he'd been avoiding for 10 years. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a number. He stared at it for a while before pressing call. When someone answered, Dad said he needed help, and he was sorry for everything that happened between them. He listened for a minute, then gave our situation in the simplest terms he could. We needed a place to stay that nobody knew about, somewhere off the grid. When he hung up, he told us we were going to Texas to stay with his brother Dennis. Mom looked shocked and asked if that was really a good idea. Dad said family was a risk, but it might be our only option left. Dad called Dennis that night on one of the burner phones. I could hear him trying to explain without really explaining, his voice getting more desperate with each sentence. Dennis must have asked a lot of questions because Dad kept saying things like, "I can't tell you everything right now, and please just trust me on this." The call lasted maybe 15 minutes. When Dad hung up, he looked at Mom and nodded. Dennis said yes. We could stay with him as long as we needed. We packed the car again even though we'd barely unpacked at the Tennessee cabin. Everything we owned fit in the trunk and back seat. Mom grabbed the secure laptop and made sure all the burner phones were charged. Dad studied a paper map he'd bought at a gas station, plotting a route to Texas that avoided major highways and cities as much as possible. We left at 2 in the morning when the roads would be emptiest. Dad drove first while Mom navigated using the paper map. No GPS, no electronic trail. I sat in the back watching small towns pass by in the darkness. We stopped once for gas at a tiny station where the attendant barely looked at us. Dad paid cash and we were back on the road in 5 minutes. The drive took almost 20 hours because we stuck to back roads and 2-lane highways. We went through small towns in Arkansas and Oklahoma that probably hadn't changed in 50 years. Every time we saw a police car, my parents would tense up until it passed. We finally crossed into Texas around 10 at night the next day. Dennis lived outside Austin in a neighborhood of small houses with big yards. His place was at the end of a gravel driveway, a 1-story ranch with peeling paint and a truck parked out front. Dad pulled up and we all just sat there for a minute. This was family. Someone we were supposed to trust. But trusting anyone felt dangerous now. Dennis came out before we could even get to the door. He looked like an older version of my dad, same build and same way of standing with his hands in his pockets. He hugged Dad for a long time without saying anything. Then he looked at me and Mom and waved us inside. The house smelled like coffee and had furniture that looked like it came from the 70s. Dennis showed us to 2 bedrooms and said we could stay as long as we needed. Then he sat Dad down at the kitchen table and started asking questions. I could hear them from the bedroom where I was supposed to be unpacking. Dennis wanted to know what kind of trouble we were in. Was it legal trouble? Was it money? Were we running from someone dangerous? Dad tried to avoid answering, but Dennis kept pushing. Finally, Dad told him a version of the truth that left out most of the details. He said we'd witnessed something bad years ago, and the people involved had finally tracked us down. We needed time to figure out our next move, and we needed to stay somewhere that wasn't connected to our normal life. Dennis asked if we'd gone to the police. Dad said it was complicated. The people we were running from had connections and resources. Going to the police might make things worse. Dennis didn't look happy with that answer, but he said he understood. He told Dad that family takes care of family no matter what. We could stay as long as we needed and he wouldn't ask more questions if we didn't want to answer them. For the first few days, I mostly stayed in the bedroom. I felt like I was in shock or something. Everything that happened kept playing in my head on repeat. The DMV, the Facebook posts, my twin sister, running, Alora's face looking sad in that photo. Mom knocked on my door on the 3rd day and said Violet wanted to do a video session with me on the secure laptop. I didn't really want to talk to anyone, but Mom said it would help. Violet's face appeared on the screen and she smiled at me in this gentle way that made me want to cry. She asked how I was doing and I said I didn't know. She said that was okay. Not knowing how you feel is normal when your whole world gets turned upside down. We talked for an hour about identity and what it means to know who you are. Violet said I was going through something called an identity crisis, where all the things I thought I knew about myself had been challenged. She said it would take time to figure out who I was now that I knew the truth. We did sessions like that every few days. Violet would ask me questions, and I'd try to answer them even when I didn't have answers. One session, I finally told her what had been eating at me since I saw Alora's photo. I said I felt guilty for being the one who got saved. Violet asked me to explain what I meant. I told her it felt wrong that I got to grow up safe with parents who loved me while Alora was stuck with the people who were trafficking kids. It should have been her, or it should have been both of us. But it wasn't fair that I got out and she didn't. Violet was quiet for a minute. Then she said survivor's guilt is a real thing that lots of people experience. When something bad happens and you make it out but someone else doesn't, you feel guilty for surviving. But she said my parents' choice wasn't my fault. I was a baby. I had no control over what happened that night. The only people responsible for this situation were the Gilmores who were trafficking children in the first place. She said I could feel sad about what happened to Alora without feeling guilty about being saved. Those were two different things. I asked her how I was supposed to live with knowing my sister was still trapped. Violet said that was something we were all working on fixing. Carl and Isla were building a case. Things were moving forward. I wasn't helpless in this situation, even though it felt that way. A week after we got to Dennis's house, Carl called on the burner phone. Dad put him on speaker so we could all hear. Carl said he and Isla had been working together for months now, building their case against the Gilmores. They'd found 3 other families who were willing to testify about the trafficking operation. One family had a son who was taken and returned during a raid 8 years ago. Another family had a daughter who escaped when she was 14. The third family had lost their child completely, but had evidence about how the Gilmores operated. With multiple witnesses and Carl's FBI resources, they might finally have enough evidence for arrests. Mom started crying when she heard that, but then Carl said there was a problem. The case would be stronger if my parents testified about what they witnessed 16 years ago. They could provide direct evidence about how the operation worked back then and confirm that the Gilmores were running it. But testifying would mean admitting to kidnapping me. Even though they saved me, legally they still took someone else's child without permission. They could face charges themselves. Dad asked what kind of charges. Carl said it depended on the prosecutor. Best case, they'd get immunity in exchange for testimony. Worst case, they could face jail time. There was no way to know until they made the deal. Mom asked if there was any other way to stop the Gilmores without them testifying. Carl said maybe, but it would take longer and be less certain. The more witnesses they had, especially ones who could speak to the early years of the operation, the stronger the case would be. We sat around Dennis's kitchen table that night talking about what to do. I said we should do it. Bringing down the trafficking ring was worth the risk. Mom looked at me like I was crazy. She said if she went to prison, she'd lose me. After everything we'd been through, after 16 years of keeping me safe, she couldn't handle the idea of being separated from me now. Dad said we weren't really living anyway if we were constantly running and hiding. What kind of life was this? We couldn't stay with Dennis forever. We couldn't keep moving from safe house to safe house. Eventually, Oswald or someone else would find us. The only way to actually end this was to face it head on. I told Mom that I'd rather have her testify and risk prison than spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. And what about Alora? What about all the other kids the Gilmores might hurt if we didn't stop them? Mom cried for a long time. Then she looked at Dad and said, okay, they'd do it. They'd testify in exchange for immunity and hope the prosecutors agreed to the deal. Dad called Carl back and told him they were in. Carl said he'd start working with Isla and the prosecutors to set up the immunity agreement. It wasn't guaranteed, but he'd do everything he could to protect them. For the first time since this started, it felt like we were moving toward a solution instead of just running away from the problem. 2 weeks went by while Carl and Isla worked on the legal stuff. Dennis let Dad help him with work around the house to keep busy. Mom spent hours on the secure laptop working with Isla to document everything she remembered from 16 years ago. I did my sessions with Violet and tried not to think too much about what would happen if the immunity deal fell through. Then Dennis called Dad one afternoon while he was at the hardware store. I was in the living room when Dennis came in looking worried. He said a man had been at the house an hour ago asking questions about us. The man said he was looking for a family that might be staying in the area. He described what we looked like perfectly. He said his name was something with an O. Dennis couldn't remember exactly, but it sounded like Oswald. Dad got home 10 minutes later and immediately started packing. Mom was already throwing our stuff in bags. Dennis kept asking what was happening, and Dad just said we had to leave right now. We loaded the car in less than 15 minutes. Dennis stood in his driveway looking confused and worried while we backed out. Dad called Carl as we drove away. Carl said to head to an address he was texting to the burner phone. It was a secure FBI facility where he could protect us while the case moved forward. For the first time, we weren't just running blindly. We were heading somewhere with a purpose, somewhere that might actually lead to ending this nightmare instead of just extending it. The FBI facility looked like any other office building from the outside, but Carl led us through multiple security checkpoints and down hallways that required badge access at every turn. They put me in a protected area on the 3rd floor with a TV, some books, and a window that looked out at nothing but a parking lot. My parents disappeared into separate interview rooms, and I didn't see them for hours. Carl checked on me around lunchtime and brought me a sandwich from the cafeteria. He said my parents were doing great, giving detailed statements about everything they witnessed 16 years ago. The process would take a few days because they needed to document every single detail, every piece of evidence my parents had kept hidden all this time. I asked if I'd have to testify too, and Carl said probably not since I was just a baby when it happened. My job was to stay safe while they built the case. The next 3 days felt endless. I did video sessions with Violet on a secure laptop. I watched TV without really seeing it. I ate meals that all tasted the same. My parents would come back to our shared room at night looking exhausted, and we'd sit together not really talking about what they'd spent hours describing to prosecutors and FBI agents. On the 4th day, Carl came to our room with a laptop and sat down at the small table. He pulled up maps and documents and started explaining what was about to happen. Based on my parents' testimony and evidence from other victims and witnesses, they were preparing to raid multiple Gilmore properties across 4 states. The operation was scheduled for the following week, and Carl said it would be one of the largest trafficking busts in the region's history. They had locations in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina. They knew about safe houses and storage facilities and offices that looked normal, but were actually part of the operation. 17 arrest warrants had been issued, not just for the Gilmores, but for their whole network. I stared at the maps showing all the places marked with red pins. All those locations, all those people involved. Carl kept talking about logistics and timing, but I could only think about one thing. I interrupted him and asked what would happen to Elora when her parents got arrested. Carl looked at me for a moment, then closed the laptop. He said she'd be placed with social services temporarily while they figured out her situation. Then he told me something that made me feel a little better. Isla had already volunteered to be Elora's caseworker. She'd be the one looking after my sister, making sure she was okay, helping her through whatever came next. At least it would be someone who actually cared, someone who understood what the Gilmores really were. The night before the raid, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what would happen when the sun came up, about Elora's life getting turned upside down the same way mine had been. Around midnight, my mom came and sat on the edge of my bed. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there in the dark. Then she started talking quietly. She said that no matter what happened next, whether they ended up going to prison, whether we could ever go home, whether we ever got to meet Elora, she wanted me to know something. Taking me that night 16 years ago was the best decision she ever made. Not because it was legal or right or easy, but because I was her son, and she loved me more than anything in the world. My dad came in then and sat down too. We all held each other in that small room in the FBI facility, a family bound by choice and love instead of biology. None of us slept much that night. The raid happened at dawn. Carl came to our room at 5 in the morning with coffee and updates on his phone. The operations were starting simultaneously across all 4 states. I sat with my parents watching Carl's phone as messages came through. 6:15, first team breached the main house in Pennsylvania. 6:20, second team entered the Maryland property. 6:30, Gilmore's in custody. My mom started crying when that message came through. 6:45, 17 arrests made, targets secured. 7:30, 12 children recovered from various locations, all placed in protective custody. Carl kept reading the updates out loud, his voice steady and professional, but I could see his hands shaking slightly. This was what he'd been working toward for 8 years. By noon, it was over. The Gilmores and 17 other people were under arrest. 12 kids who'd been trapped in that nightmare were safe. News vans were already showing up at the properties, and Carl said it would be all over the media by evening. 2 days later, Carl told me that Elora had been brought to a facility about an hour from where we were staying. Isla had arranged for me to meet her, but there would be therapists present and strict rules about what we could discuss. I felt sick with nerves. I was about to meet my twin sister, the girl who had my face and my birthday, but a completely different life. The girl my parents had to leave behind. Violet drove me to the facility where Elora was staying. It looked like a regular house from outside, but inside it was clearly set up for kids in crisis. Soft furniture, calming colors, toys, and books everywhere. Isla met us at the door and led me to a small room with 2 couches and a box of tissues on the table. She told me to take my time, that Elora was nervous too. Then the door opened and my sister walked in. It was like looking in a mirror, but wrong somehow. Same eyes, same nose, same shape of face. But her hair was different, and she stood different, and her expression was nothing like mine. She looked at me and stopped walking. Another therapist came in behind her and gently guided her to the other couch. We sat there staring at each other while the therapists introduced themselves and explained the rules. No touching, no promises, no pressure. Just talking. Elora spoke first. She said the Gilmores were her parents and I was wrong about them. They loved her and took care of her, and everything the FBI was saying was lies. Her voice shook when she said it, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. But as we kept talking, with Violet and the other therapist asking gentle questions, I could see cracks forming in her certainty. She'd pause before answering. She'd look away. She'd start to say something and then stop. I told her about our parents, the ones who raised me. I explained how they tried to save both of us that night, but only got me out. I pulled out my phone and showed her photos my mom had kept, pictures of Elora from those Facebook posts over the years. Proof that she'd been remembered every single day for 16 years, never forgotten even though she was left behind. My mom had screenshots going back years, organized in a folder she looked at every March 15th. Elora stared at the photos for a long time. Then she started crying. Not loud, dramatic crying, just tears running down her face while she kept looking at the phone. She admitted something that I don't think she'd ever said out loud before. She'd always felt like something was wrong, like there was a piece of her missing that she couldn't name. The Gilmores were never warm or loving with her. They treated her more like an employee than a daughter. They made her perform grief she didn't fully understand, made her do interviews and appearances where she had to cry about her missing brother. But she never felt the sadness they told her she should feel. It was all just words she'd been taught to say. We didn't become instant siblings. That's not how trauma and family work. You can't just meet someone and suddenly have a relationship because you share DNA. But before I left, we exchanged phone numbers. We agreed to keep talking, to try to build something slowly. Isla promised she'd keep us updated on each other's situations as everything moved forward. When Violet drove me back to the FBI facility, I felt weird. Not happy exactly, but less hollow than before. My sister was real now, not just a ghost in photos my mom kept hidden. She was a real person with her own pain and confusion and questions. And maybe eventually we could figure out how to be siblings. Not right away, but someday. The legal stuff started the next week. Carl connected my parents with prosecutors who wanted to use their testimony to take down the whole trafficking network. The meetings went on for months, with lawyers and investigators asking the same questions over and over, making my parents relive that night 16 years ago in excruciating detail. They had to describe everything they saw in that house, every person they encountered, every piece of evidence they could remember. The prosecutors finally agreed to immunity, but it came with a bunch of conditions. My parents had to do 200 hours of community service each, attend mandatory counseling sessions twice a month, and accept monitoring by social services for 5 years. It wasn't perfect, and it meant government people would be checking in on us regularly, but at least we got to stay together as a family. My dad signed the papers with shaking hands while my mom cried quietly next to him. The Gilmores and their people got charged with dozens of counts. Human trafficking, child abuse, fraud, racketeering, the list went on and on. Carl showed us the charging documents and the stack of papers was literally inches thick. The trial started 3 months after the arrests, and suddenly our story was everywhere. News channels ran segments about the trafficking ring, newspapers published investigative pieces, and social media exploded with people sharing the story. Our identities were supposed to be protected, but everyone in our town knew something big had happened with our family. Reporters camped outside the courthouse and tried to interview anyone connected to the case. I saw our story on the front page of the newspaper at a gas station and felt sick. We got permission to go home while the trial was happening. Walking back into our house after months away felt completely wrong. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt right. The furniture sat in the same spots. My stuff was still in my room, but it was like walking into a museum of our old life. Our neighbors stared at us when we pulled into the driveway. Mrs. Ikori from next door watched through her curtains. The Rodriguezes across the street stopped their yard work to look. Nobody came over to say welcome back or ask if we needed anything. They all knew something had happened, but not the details, and their curiosity mixed with suspicion made me want to hide inside forever. I couldn't go back to my old school. Too many people had questions. Too much attention followed our family. The principal called my parents and suggested it would be better for everyone if I finished my junior year somewhere else. So I started at a new school 20 minutes away where nobody knew who I was or what had happened. Walking into that building on my first day felt like being the new kid all over again, except this time I was carrying the weight of everything we'd been through. I sat alone at lunch for the first 2 weeks. Eventually, some kids from my math class started talking to me, but I kept everyone at a distance. I was getting better at adapting to new situations after months of running and hiding, but making real friends felt impossible when I couldn't tell them anything true about my life. Alora got placed in foster care while the legal system figured out what to do with her. She ended up with a family in a different county, people Isla said were experienced with kids from difficult backgrounds. We video chatted every Tuesday night, sitting in front of our laptop screens trying to build some kind of relationship. She was in therapy twice a week, working through the truth about the Gilmores with a counselor who specialized in trafficking victims. Watching her process, everything was painful because I understood exactly what she was going through. She'd talk about memories from her childhood and then stop herself, questioning if they were even real or just things the Gilmores had made her believe. She grieved for parents who never actually loved her, for a childhood built entirely on lies. Some calls she barely spoke. Other times she asked me 100 questions about our parents, wanting to know every detail about the people who saved me but left her behind. My parents and I kept going to therapy too. Violet saw us once a week as a family, and then met with me separately every other week. We worked through all the complicated feelings about what they did and what it meant for us. I was angry about the lies, grateful for the love, confused about my identity, and scared about the future all at the same time. Violet helped me understand that I didn't have to pick one feeling over the others, that complicated emotions don't cancel each other out. My parents dealt with their own guilt and fear, talking through the choice they made that night and whether they'd do it differently if they could go back. Mom still cried every time she talked about leaving Alora behind. Dad struggled with the fact that saving me meant technically being a criminal, but slowly, session by session, we started to heal. The trial ended after 6 weeks of testimony. The Gilmores got convicted on multiple charges along with 7 other people in their network. Mordecai got 40 years, Dinah got 35, and the others got sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. Carl called us the night the verdicts came in and said the investigation was continuing, that they were following connections to other trafficking operations in different states. More arrests would probably happen over the next year as they tracked down everyone involved. I felt relieved that the Gilmores would be in prison for decades, but it didn't erase the damage they'd caused or give back the childhoods they'd stolen. 6 months after everything started, Isla called with news that changed our whole world again. Alora's foster placement wasn't working out. The family was nice, but they had 3 other foster kids, and Alora felt lost in the chaos. She'd asked Isla if she could meet my parents, the people who tried to save her all those years ago. Isla explained that after lots of evaluation and legal proceedings, there was a possibility of Alora joining our family if everyone agreed. My parents started crying on the phone. I sat there stunned, trying to imagine what it would mean to actually have my sister living with us. Isla said it wouldn't be easy or fast, that there would be months of supervised visits and assessments before anything permanent could happen, but it was possible. We met as a potential family at Isla's office on a Saturday morning. All of us were nervous and hopeful and scared. Alora walked in wearing jeans and a sweater that looked too big for her hair pulled back in a ponytail. My parents saw her in person for the first time since she was a baby, and my mom immediately broke down crying. She apologized over and over for leaving her behind, for not being able to save both of us, for 16 years of absence. Alora crossed the room and hugged her, actually hugged her and said she understood they did what they had to do. She said she was grateful they saved at least one of us, that knowing someone had tried to rescue her meant more than my parents could ever know. My dad joined the hug, and the 3 of them stood there holding each other while I watched with tears running down my face. Isla gave us time to just be together, to start building something that might eventually become a real family. The process of Alora joining us took 4 more months of therapy and supervised visits and legal paperwork. But eventually she moved in with us, bringing 2 suitcases of belongings and a lifetime of trauma to process. It was awkward and wonderful and difficult all at once. Learning to be siblings meant figuring out how to share space and respect boundaries and build trust from nothing. I watched my parents navigate raising the daughter they lost, trying to make up for 16 years while also accepting they couldn't erase what happened. We had good days where everything felt almost normal, and hard days where the weight of our history made it difficult to breathe. But we were together now, all 4 of us, trying to become the family we should have been from the start. The scholarship was gone for good, burned up with my old identity, but I started filling out applications to state schools within driving distance of home. I picked ones where I could commute if needed, where I could be there if my family fell apart again, or if Alora needed me. She was living with us full-time now and trying to figure out how to be a normal teenager after 16 years of whatever the Gilmores put her through. I'd come home from the school and find her in the kitchen with my mom, both of them covered in flour, laughing about a batch of cookies that came out flat or burned. Mom taught her how to make chocolate chip cookies from scratch, then snickerdoodles, then these complicated French things I couldn't pronounce. Every afternoon they baked something new, and I realized my mom was giving Alora all the normal moments she'd missed, one recipe at a time. When March 15th came around, we celebrated our 17th birthday together for the first time ever. Mom and Dad set up the dining room with decorations, and there were 2 cakes on the table like always. But this time when I looked at them, I didn't feel sad. One was chocolate with vanilla frosting, the other was red velvet with cream cheese icing, and they both had 17 candles. Alora stood next to me and we blew them out together while Mom cried happy tears and Dad took about 100 photos on his phone. We're not a perfect family, and our story isn't finished. There's still therapy appointments and legal paperwork, and days when Alora wakes up crying or I get angry about everything we lost. But we're together now, all 4 of us trying to build something real out of the broken pieces, and that's enough.